Hello, this is Jack Olmsted. I'm with GMO Free News. Today we have a very special guest, and that is Chris Savage. He's the owner publisher of Eclectablog. How's it going today, Chris?
It's good. I'm good. It's Eclectablog.
Eclectablog. I'm sorry, Eclectablog. Tell me about Eclectablog.
Eclectablog is basically Michigan's most widely read progressive news and commentary site, and I've been doing it for about 10 years. Basically, we're covering about 60 to 70% Michigan-related statewide stuff, and then the rest of it is national commentary primarily. We have about 7 writers now, and they're all paid for their work. And we do that through annual and quarterly fundraisers. And so just trying to get the word out. And I think with Michigan being sort of ground zero for a lot of what's going on, we've got a story to tell that the rest of the country needs to be paying attention to.
How long have you been covering the Flint water crisis?
Well, things really started, I would say probably middle of last fall when things really started to get heated up. That's when I really started covering it. But I've written about Flint on and off over the years. Really,
so last fall is like October, September.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit before that because they were having all of the E. coli issues and that type of thing. But I really started writing about it heavily in, let's say, October, November.
And how about the emergency management law? When did you start?
Well, I've been writing about that since the spring of 2011 when they first passed it. I mean, as soon as it passed, once I realized what was in it, I just, it became really something that I felt like the rest of the world needed to be paying attention to, because, or at least the rest of the country, because it seemed like Michigan was sort of the beta tester for this new model of removing democracy when it becomes inconvenient to getting things passed the way, the people who have the power in Lansing want it to be, want things to be done. So, and sadly, much of what, I predicted, or at least, warned people about, has come true largely. And now who could have predicted that it would have led to, the poisoning of drinking water in a major city in Michigan?
I think what they were intending to do was bleed the people, not kill off the people. So when you kill off the people take notice. But when you bleed them to death, you can stay under the radar, especially with the.
It has been a slow drip, but there's no question that a lot of the cities that have been involved with this, all of the cities that have been involved with this, have had financial issues. But the financial issues that they have are largely not the result of corruption and mismanagement and incompetence, which is what you would be led to believe if the proponents of emergency management would have their way. But they're the result of the cratering of their industrial base. Almost every single one of them was either automotive related or some was centered around some other major local industry. And when that left, it cratered the economy and left behind all of this infrastructure that needed to be supported on a fraction of the number of people there and the fraction of the sort of economic wealth that sort of a community shares. All of that was gone. So, it's been very unfortunate to see our urban areas, instead of being sort of renewed and invested in, they've been disinvested in, and to the point where they no longer can support the infrastructure, or their basic local, community infrastructure, or if you want to call it that, for a large geographical area.
So looking into your crystal ball, what is the intent of the emergency management law? What are they trying to do? I know they've got these cities that have been built out to support twice as many as people that are living in there. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I think there are two different things going on. I'm the sort of person who tends to believe the best in people. And in some cases, I'm justified. In some cases, I'm not. I think in the best of situations, there are people who, and I believe that our governor is probably one of these people, who feels that a model of running a government like a business is the correct model, and that if you enrich the wealthy, manufacturing heads and organizations, that will benefit society as a whole. And they believe this, and so everything that they do is based on, making sure that corporations do extremely well, and that will be the panacea, to the point where if there's a city with a problem, then you want to put in a corporate management type person and let them do their thing. And their thing is almost always busting the unions and privatizing the services, to the point where what a municipality once owned or had as community property, they no longer have control over. So I think there's that. And I do think that there are people cheering from the sidelines that are part of who would receive that largesse of tax, of tax money being infused into their profit centers. So these are people who provide the services like prison food services, for example, or all the things that go into educating children and things that go into running governments and things like that. They want to be, this is sort of the last way for tax dollars to be funneled into corporate, bottom lines. And so that's what they're going after. So it's things like education, and it's the privatizing of government services. So
that's their end result, is trying to privatize public services?
To some extent, yes, I believe that that's true. I also believe that they would love to see nothing more than for places like Benton Harbor, for example, that sit on Lake Michigan, to become basically gentrified and to move out all the poor people and sort of rebuild these cities. And you can go to Detroit and or Flint right now, or other places like Highland Park and Muskegon Heights and places like this, and the real estate values there are tremendous right now. You can buy homes and businesses and buildings for just fraction of the money on the dollar. So these are opportunities. But I do think that at the core of this thing is this belief that that these urban centers are collapsed because of incompetence and corruption, and all they have to do is go in there and impose a business model on it, and that will solve things. And I reject this. I mean, there's so much evidence that it's just not true and that it does not work. With emergency management, we have just the evidence is piling up now that this is not a successful model.
Well, obviously, it was not very successful in Flint. They went in talking about financial incompetence, fiscal responsibility, trying to save millions of dollars, cutting corners, and now look at what they got.
Well, that's right.
They got a huge elephant that is bleeding everybody totally dry, and they still have this emergency management concept in tow. I'm surprised the feds will allow them to continue to operate under this.
No, after this, I think I'm seeing pushback against the whole, policy of emergency management in ways that I've never seen before. In terms
for whatever money that they thought they saved or they were able to recoup, this right here sucks it all away.
Yeah, that is absolutely true.
And so in terms of fiscal responsibility, if you want to take a look at the numbers, let's just, as a business, let's look at the numbers. What they did was beyond pale. I mean, people are going to jail, hopefully, and they're going to bankrupt the state. The state.
I'm not so optimistic that anybody's going to jail over this, except possibly some of the protesters. To be perfectly honest with you.
Well, the protesters have been to jail. I did a blog, and we showed on video one of the protesters getting handcuffed and put into a police car, and she was hauled off to jail, and she's got a GoFundMe campaign. Not one single person has contributed to her legal defense. All she needs is $1,500, but she's been swept under the rug. She was arrested for going to the farmer's market, the Flint farmer's market, and holding up a sign talking about poisoned water, and they wanted her out of there. So yeah.
Well, the same thing, and the same thing is happening in Detroit public schools right now, because emergency management isn't just for cities and municipalities, it's also for school districts. And the same guy that was the emergency manager that made a crucial decision that led us to the point where we are today in Flint, Darnell Early, is now the emergency manager in Detroit. Detroit public schools, not Detroit City, but Detroit public schools. Detroit public schools have been under emergency manager now for over a decade, and they are now $500 million in debt. They are more in debt now than they were when emergency managers were first started being put into that school system. So, I mean, like I said, there's so much mounting evidence that emergency management as a policy and as a way to fix, our crumbling urban centers is completely, it's just completely proven to be false.
Do you know what it takes to become emergency manager?
Not much, like 4 hours of training or something.
you go to a class, a free class. I know somebody who has a syllabus for the class.
Yes.
And then you go from making $500 a day to $1,000 an hour.
I know, I get it. I was the first person to publish that syllabus.
Oh yeah, you published the syllabus?
Well, it was actually the course pack, so it was basically a notebook full of stuff that somebody had scanned in for me. So yeah, it's this goes way back, and and that particular syllabus was published in addition to some video that we have of the first emergency manager in Benton Harbor, basically bragging about he is now the government. He can do everything he wants to, and he's teaching these new emergency managers this concept of being one person in charge of an entire city. It was just so audacious and so disgusting.
I'd like to see that video.
I'll send you the link.
And we'll publish it out there, because mainstream media now. We only have what, 5 minutes, 6 minutes of your time, and then you poof, you got to go. So what do you think of the mainstream media of the Flint water crisis?
This has been an example of our local media, at least in Michigan, doing an incredibly good job, quite frankly. And I'm their harshest critic in a lot of times, but the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit News, MLive, Michigan Radio, all four of those as outlets have done a fine job, in my opinion. They've been augmented by the work that Curt Guyette did. Curt Guyette was hired by the ACLU to do investigative journalism, so it's sort of a new model for doing journalism, which is that a private group like ACLU actually hires somebody to do this. But largely, I've been pretty impressed. I think that when I go to look for information, I can find that information, and I'm seeing quite a bit of pushback. Now, this is, when you look at the Detroit Free Press, in Michigan, the Detroit Free Press is always the liberal newspaper because of their op-ed page, and the Detroit News is always the conservative newspaper, and they were sort of at, the two competitors. And for the last two elections, Rick Snyder has received the endorsement of the Detroit Free Press. So, I've been very critical of these newspapers, but I've been pretty impressed, I have to say, in comparison to what I'd seen in the lead up to what's happened in the last year, but by their coverage and by their tenacity at asking questions and getting people to be, held accountable for what they're doing. So that's good.
Well, I had Curt Guyette on a show back in November, and I asked him about the coverage, and the only publication he said was worth their salt that was doing a good job, that was Michigan Radio.
Yeah, Michigan Radio has been definitely been.
And I said, well, who's doing the bad job? Who would you give a C? Who would you give a D? He wouldn't give anybody a grade. He just said, I will not comment. I will not, because he has to live in the state. He would not tell what he felt.
Yeah, well, I've been watching these guys for a decade now, and I've got something to compare it to, and I really think that it's been a lot better than it has been in the past. So I'm pleased by this, Jack, because we need a vibrant third estate in order to have vibrant democracy. You can't have good democracy without good media, so it's very important. And
well, if you take a look at the history of, say, MLive and the Flint Journal, they've been rubber stamps. They were rubber stamps for the administration and for what the government was doing up until December. As soon as the Mayor Weaver, made that declaration, and she started to get. No,
I see. I disagree with you on that. I'm sorry, I disagree with you. They've done some pretty good reporting over the last 9 months, I'd say. I would not agree with you on that.
Well, I will have to go through my timeline, which is 1,300 lines, and we could go down article for article, and you can show me how they really supported the protesters that were going to these city councils with their bottles of water and pleading with somebody to listen to them. Even a year ago, January 26th.
The media has shown all of those things because they're provocative, and those images have been played out in Michigan for the last year since they started seeing those problems. So I think I mean, it may not have resulted in the Detroit City or the Flint City Council having the sort of, I should say the emergency manager having the sort of responsiveness to them that you would want. But you have to keep in mind that the city council is no longer, they're not answerable to, they're not the government that the citizens have to be, be holding accountable. It's the emergency manager. And so all of these images shown in the news have not changed that because it's one person, and he doesn't even have to look at it.
I'm talking about the city council meetings that are on YouTube right now, where the residents are going before city council with their bottles of water. And we're talking about last year. It's a 2-hour video, and there's a bunch of them that I've been posting. I've been posting the stories, and the local press did not talk about any of this kind of stuff at that time, and they really, framed their coverage around the government says it's safe. The water is safe. The water is safe. The water is safe. That's how they framed it. And they might have the images. We're talking about the local press here. They might have had the images, but the way they framed their article was around the government, and it was safe. They always had to give them the last word. They might throw a couple of quotes in there from the residents, but they always, at the last, what to leave people with, that's what they remember. Who had the last word? The government, the elected official. That's it. So that's how, I guess I would have to say, the local media up until December 15th, when the mayor made the pitch of taking the city into emergency management status, they were rubber stamps for the whatever came out of the emergency management or the government. Anyway, I guess we can agree to disagree on that.
But one thing I would say is that when you get outside of the state of Michigan right now, I think that there's been some good writing, but I think that it's been pretty surprising to see how poor the national mainstream media has been on this, in terms of just getting facts wrong and things like that. And the facts are there to be had. I just feel like it's become a sensational story, and the facts sort of have been not always paid attention to in the national writing. So I find myself pushing back sometimes on some of the way things have been portrayed. And right now, the Snyder administration is circling the wagons, and the corporatists are pushing this out everywhere that they can, that this is the result of low-level, bureaucrats, basically.
No, it's not my fault. That's what they're pushing back at. Not my fault. And I think the blog post that you did today shows a direct connection with emergency management. It is their fault for this going to the Flint River, using the Flint River.
Absolutely, it is.
It wasn't the 7-1 city council vote that got this thing moving. It was the city manager, and it was a city manager in Detroit too. You had two cities under city management, and they decided this is what they were going to do. Right. The governor, both of them were reporting to the governor. The governor at any time could have picked up the phone and said, Detroit worked with Flint, Flint worked with Detroit, that's it, end of story. We're not going to be using the river water. You've been supplying water to Flint for 40 years, so you're going to keep doing it. If Detroit wants to wants a rate increase, Flint, suck it up and pay the rate. Or he could have said, Detroit, they're not going to give you a rate increase. Suck it up. You're going to lower the rates for another year, and that's it. But he didn't do that. No, he was the decider. He had both emergency managers, and the water districts were under the emergency management directive. And so
that's exactly right.
The mainstream media doesn't they pick it up at 2014.
That's a story that's not told. I agree with you 100%.
Well, there's a lot of stories that are not told, like the Daily. Anyway, I'll let. Don't get me started on the untold stories. Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate your time, and we're going to do this again a little bit longer, so that you can really talk about what gets you up at night.
All right.
Over this story.
Sounds great.
I'm going to stop the broadcast. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.